Deidre, am I pronounced right?
Correct. Deidre.
And Jules. Offenbach.
Close enough.
Okay.
It's not my last name. It's my ex-husband's last name. I'm kidding. But
Same here. My maiden name was Howard. It's a lot easier to
Okay.
pronounce.
I should have stuck with Howard. My maiden last name was worse than my married last name.
Your maiden is worse?
Mm-hmm.
Ah. What's your maiden name?
Vasileva.
I'm originally from Mississippi, but I live in Des Moines.
Mm-hmm.
South side of Des Moines.
I'm on the west side.
West side. Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with the procedure, how we do it? You have 2 minutes for an opening remark, and then we'll ask a question. The league will ask the question, the first question, and then we'll take questions from the audience. And you'll have 1 minute to respond to each question. Due to the time frame, there won't be time for rebuttals. And I'll try to alternate the speaking order. And then you'll have time at the end, too.
2 minutes at the end?
I believe so, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, speak closer to the mic.
Is this good for me? Okay.
What about me? All right.
Are we on? Yeah. Oh, good evening and welcome, candidates. You who are in the audience and those of viewing at home or online. I'm Polly. This is the candidate forum for the Iowa Secretary of State. I'm Polly Horton, member of the League of Women Voters of Johnson County, and I will be the moderator for this evening's forum in place of Galen Wobiter, who could not be here tonight. The forum is being live streamed on the League's Facebook page. It is also being filmed for rebroadcast on the 3 public, education, and government channels in Iowa City, Coralville, and North Liberty. Please check their websites for scheduling. Additional information about the candidates may be found on the League's Vote 411 website. The League of Women Voters is a volunteer, nonpartisan organization that neither supports nor opposes any party or candidate, which is why we have the policy that campaign literature is welcome outside of this room following the forum, and no buttons, signs, or literature can be worn or distributed inside of this room. The League does take positions after considerable study of issues and acts to influence decision makers on those issues. We work to not only register voters, but also to provide them with information on issues to assist their participation in government. Membership is open to anyone 16 years of age or older. Please join us. We can use your time, your talent, and your financial resources. Democracy works best when more people are involved. The views expressed in this forum are those of the candidates. All viable candidates have been invited to participate. Paul Pate, Republican incumbent, is not able to be here tonight. The format for this evening is as follows. After the candidates have been introduced, they will each have 2 minutes for opening remarks. We will then present them questions to them, starting with one from the league, followed by one submitted on cards by you in the audience. League members are distributing cards and pencils for you to write questions on. You may submit as many written questions for the candidates as you wish. Hold up the cards, and a league member will collect them throughout the forum and bring them to me to read. Questions that fall in the same general category may be consolidated. If time does not allow for all the questions to be addressed, you may contact the candidate directly after the forum or at another time. Each candidate will have 1 minute to respond to each question. Due to the time frame, there will not be time for rebuttals. Near the end of the scheduled time for this event, each candidate will have 2 minutes for closing remarks. Speaking order will be rotated throughout the evening. There is a league member in the front row who will be our timekeeper, using cards to alert candidates when time is about up and when it is up. Tonight we have 2 candidates here who are running for Iowa Secretary of State, a 4-year position. Deidre DeGier, Democratic, Jules Offenbach, Libertarian. Let's get started with the opening statements. Please speak directly into the microphone so you can be heard here and over the television broadcast. Let's begin with your 2-minute opening statement, starting with Ms. DeGier.
Good evening. Thanks to each and every one of you all who took time out of your day to come to the League. Thank you for hosting this amazing event to just increase the awareness around how important the Secretary of State's office is. And Jules, thanks for joining, of course. I am really excited about running for Secretary of State. If this were a job I could interview for, I would do it. But we're doing the interview in the form of a campaign, and I'm willing to do that as well. And the reason being is because I'm a small business owner in Des Moines. And I started my small business in college, my senior year, to help other businesses and nonprofits get started. If you recall, that was around the brink of the recession. And folks were getting laid off from their jobs and had no choice but to become entrepreneurs. And what we were finding was that they had great products and services, but didn't necessarily know how to market themselves and connect to a customer base. I've also worked on campaigns in the past as well. I was a campus organizer in 2007 for Barack Obama, then Senator Barack Obama. Also worked in 2012 as a statewide vote director. My job was to get hard-to-reach populations to vote. And after that campaign, then committed to 2 more school board races for fun because I really am committed to engaging voters. And each and every race that I've been involved in, my job has been to go find the voters and to connect with the voters. And I think in a climate like this, as Ms. Polly said earlier, democracy works best when more people are involved. Well, we need more people involved. We need more people getting engaged in our elections. We also have to ensure that our small businesses are well taken care of, and we can do that through the Secretary of State's office.
Thank you. And now 2 minutes for Jules.
Good evening. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for inviting me. I am Jules Offenbach. I am a libertarian running for Secretary of State, and I am that Russian you want in charge of your elections. I understand the value of being heard through the ballot. I grew up in a country where your voice was not heard. For the first time in my life, I was able to vote at the age of 32. And believe me when I tell you that I know how women in the early 1900s felt when they were able to vote for the first time. Right to vote is fundamental to me, and it is an obligation and a privilege that should not be taken for granted. And the barriers to the right to vote should never, ever, ever be placed. Therefore, the barrier of a state-issued ID is absolutely not something that I will ever agree with. I'm a business owner with computer science degree, law degree, and an MBA. I've been practicing for the last 9 years, primarily in the business law area. and I deal with the Secretary's office on a regular basis. I can tell you that our businesses do not have the support that they need from that office. I can tell you that businesses struggle with registering their businesses, with changing their fictitious names, with filing their biannual reports. My construction clients struggle with mechanics liens. There is absolutely no reason why this should be going on in today's technology. I have about 25 years of experience in business. In my early 20s, I hired, trained, managed, and fired, if necessary, people when I ran the help desk at the county government in New Jersey. I am an Iowan because 14 years ago, my company took me to Iowa to establish the office here and create jobs. Thank you.
Thank you. The first question is from the League of Women Voters. Iowa is one of 4 states that does not restore voting rights to felons who have completed their sentences. Do you believe that felons should have voting rights restored? Why or why not? And we'll start with Jules.
Thank you. Absolutely. People who serve their debt to the society should have the right to vote. And it used to be an automatic restoration of the right to vote. However, Mr. Schultz, I believe, went and lobbied when Mr. Branstad was the governor and requested to pull that administrative order. The right to vote is fundamental. And when you served your time, you should be entitled to go and be heard at the ballot. Thank you.
And Deidre?
So when we think about folks leaving prison and going back into mainstream society, the expectation is that they go back, get a job, and add value to their communities. And I don't believe we can ask them to do that and in the same voice take away their voice and take away their vote. I believe that the process right now that exists is not an equitable process. It's confusing, and many times they have to hire attorneys to help them walk their way through the 12 steps that are necessary in order to restore their rights. I also understand that the process is not completely free because they have to request their court records, which is not complimentary from the court system. I believe that felons do need the right to vote once they re-enter mainstream society because we want them to be involved, we want them to be engaged, and we need to hear their voice via the ballot box.
Thank you. Now, the next question is from the audience, and Deidre, would you go first? What is your opinion of the requirement for picture ID for voters?
So the requirement for an ID, I believe, is a barrier for many Iowans. We know we have 125,000 registered voters that neither have an ID or a driver's license. And that's a serious situation, especially when we see some of our races that are won by very, very small margins. I think it's key that when we're going to change the process of voting, that we change it in such a way that is not a barrier for many people. Not to mention, those folks have to pay for IDs. They have to pay for driver's licenses. Our current Secretary of State has changed the process in voting and only allocated $50,000 to educating the state on it. The bigger picture is how do we overeducate folks on this new law because it has passed. And it may or may not go anywhere. But needless to say, we still need people engaged in the process, and I'm willing to be the Secretary of State that overcompensates for these barriers to ensure that we have equal access to the ballot box.
Thank you. Jules, what is your opinion of the requirement for picture IDs for voters?
I believe that it is a barrier to our right to vote. Our constitutional right to freedom of speech doesn't come with a state-issued ID. The right to vote should not come either. In 2016 election, out of 1.6 million Iowans who voted, there were only 10 who were deemed to be casted inappropriately. According to Mr. Pate, it's about the cost of implementing the voter ID law will be about $1 million. That is $100,000 per vote of our taxpayer money. The ACLU pulled the numbers from the state of Indiana, and the similar law cost them to implement about $10 million. That is $1 million per vote. That is a waste of taxpayer money, and I am absolutely not somebody who will stand for that.
The next question, we'll start with you, Jules. How would you make Iowa's voting process transparent?
Education. Education and accessibility. The $1 million that Mr. Pate is dedicating to implementing the voter ID law could be implemented into the accessibility of the polls, could be used to research the secure online electronic voting, could be used in making sure that poll workers are properly educated and properly administer the voting process. In 2016 election, again, in Dallas County, there were about 12 to 13% of votes lost. When they discovered it in February, they counted 5,832 votes, I believe, that were never counted. The hypocrisy of Mr. Pate's position is that very quickly, the auditor of the Dallas County and Mr. Pate issued a statement that because those votes were distributed proportionally, it had no effect on our election, even though the numbers were different.
Thank you. Deidre, how would you make Iowa's voting process transparent?
I would agree with Jules in saying that the first part is education, ensuring that in light of these voter ID law changes and also systematic changes as it relates to people accessing the ballot box, that people understand those things. I remember in the first soft rollout in the primary, our poll workers were confused about the law. The media was confused about the law, and in addition to that, voters were confused about the law. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we have to go above and beyond to ensure that people understand how to exercise their right to vote. The second component is more of a security component. We do not have audit requirements in our state that are adhered to. And so I believe another way to ensure that there is transparency in our voter system is to have risk-limiting audits. That's a random opportunity for us to choose different counties in order to ensure that every vote is counted and it's counted adequately and it's fair in that process.
The next question, we have a theme here. What would you consider to be an ideal voting system for the state? You're going to design an ideal voting system. We'll start with Deidre.
The first thing that I would do is actually have real automatic voter registration. So when someone goes to the DOT to get their driver's license or ID, they're automatically registered to vote if they're eligible to vote in our state. And if they would like to opt out, they could do that at that time. And the reason why I want that is because when we go to the DOT, we're giving them the most correct and updated data that exists about us as an individual. I would like to use that data so that I can communicate with each and every one of our registered voters throughout the state. So when there is an election, you know that there is an election. You know who's going to be on your ballot. You know where your polling location is. I think that's going to work wonders for us as a state as it relates to not only increasing voter registration, but also increasing turnout.
Jules, what would you consider to be an ideal voting system for the state of Iowa?
How much money do I have? In an ideal world, if I had enough money to spend, I would be spent on researching the secure electronic voting. Right now, I believe technology exists, but I also believe that it needs to be implemented properly, and there needs to be a skilled professional who recruits the people who know how to do it properly. Otherwise, you will get Russians who don't want meddling with your elections doing so.
And we've sort of touched on this, but we'll start with you, Jules. What is your stand on online voter registration, automatic registration at 18?
I support that. Like Deidre said, it would ease the communication with the voters. It would ensure that the voters know where their location, or voting location is. They will ensure that every vote counts that wants to be counted. Online registration for the voters, I think, is a very good idea, and it will just make sure that all the Iowans are heard.
Deidre, what was your stand on online voter registration?
So we have an aspect of online voter registration in our state right now. However, you have to have a state ID or a state-issued driver's license in order to do that. I would like to expand that, and so the reason why I would is because, like I said, we know we have at least 125,000 voters in our state without IDs and without driver's licenses, and that accessibility may be key for them as it relates to getting engaged in our voter process. And then the latter part of your question, the first part was online voter?
Online, and then automatic registration at 18?
Yes, and so I believe that automatic voter registration or automatic voter registration for our 17-and-a-half-year-olds at the time if they are 17-and-a-half or 18 at the time of an election, general election, then they should be eligible to vote at 17-and-a-half in a primary and also automatically be registered to vote as well.
Okay, we're going to go back to the issue of restoring felon voting rights. The question is, according to the Iowa Constitution, it's the governor who can decide whether to permit ex-felons to vote. Would you try to change the Constitution or just change the governor's mind?
Me first?
You first.
So, our Secretary of State lobbied to get this voter ID law passed, and he actually commissioned this bill. I don't believe it's the role of the Secretary of State to be in the job of creating bills and making bills. I believe it's the job of the Secretary of State to commission our elections and our campaigns and to oversee business registration. I think in order to ensure that this role maintains its nonpartisanship, that it not get into the weeds of creating legislation. But however, I do know that I have spoken with gubernatorial candidates, and not all of them obviously agree with automatic restoration of voting rights, but I'm on the side of those who do agree for automatic voter registration rights for our felons.
Jules.
It is the libertarian position that automatic voter registration voter rights need to be restored once the person served their time. We call our prisons rehabilitative facilities. Therefore, we should treat people who come out of prisons as rehabilitated persons. I am a lawyer. I believe in Constitution, and I believe that Iowa Constitution is a lot stronger when protecting Iowa rights versus the United States Constitution. I believe that I would not want to change the Constitution. I would most certainly want to change the governor's mind and go back to automatic restoration of the rights.
Thank you. So we'll start with you, Jules. Please talk, please talk about your ideas on how to engage voters in unrepresented and marginalized communities. Ideas on how to engage voters in underrepresented and marginalized communities.
The voter outreach programs that are lagging right now, our current Secretary of State does not participate in about 2/3, I believe, of committee meetings that he's supposed to. So I really don't expect him to go and participate in any of the voter outreach programs. I wish he did, because that is in my opinion, the job of the Secretary of State to engage the voters. I also think that Mr. Pate's inability to cooperate with the county auditors and with their association to help them with education and to help them with their outreach is inappropriate. And that is something that I most certainly would do, is start with the county auditors, who I know are doing a great job, the majority of them, at their outreach programs.
So, Deidre, talk about your ideas on how to engage voters in underrepresented and marginalized communities.
So in each campaign that I've been involved in, this has been my job, to go find voters and to connect with voters, not just the voters who are, quote, reliable voters, those ones who show up for every election, but those voters who are not even registered and not engaged in all of our elections. And the reason being is because our democracy depends on hearing each and every eligible voter's voice via the ballot box in our state. And the way that we do that is meet people where they're at. We can't expect for them to come to the Secretary of State's office. We can't always expect for them to walk into our party offices. And so the way we meet them where they're at is connecting with community organizations like the League of Women Voters. Our state auditors operate, or our not state auditors, county auditors operate in 6 different regions throughout our state. And what I've realized in traveling is that not all of our counties have the resources. They don't have an active party. They may have maybe 2 or 3 league members in the county. And so we need to ensure that those folks have resources, and working with organizations like the League, NAACP, and LULAC is going to strengthen our chances to get out the vote.
Have you both answered that question? I was lost.
Yes.
Okay, good. We'll go to the next question. Thank you. And so it must be Deidre's turn to start first. So this is coming from the audience. What does the Secretary of State do? What are the duties and responsibilities of the office? Deidre.
So I'll give you 2 big buckets because I only have a minute. The first big bucket, Commissioner of Elections and Campaigns. So they are the ones who oversee all of our elections and the administration of our elections through the county auditor's office. They also are in charge of ensuring that our candidates have the ability to actually file and become candidates, and educating those candidates on how to actually be a candidate and follow the code. The other component is business registration. Anybody doing business in our state has to go through that office first. Otherwise, you can't get a bank account in your business name unless you do. And so I think that the way we maximize that office is to really ensure that our state is held accountable to the National Voting Rights Act and the National Voter Registration Act. Also to ensure that we're making sure that our business owners have the resources to not only start, but to connect them to the resources that are going to help them grow, these resources that our taxpayer dollars are going towards every single day. And I'm positive we can do that through this office. It doesn't cost money, it just costs care.
Jules, what does the Secretary of State do? What are the duties and responsibilities of the office?
Well, in addition to what Deidre said, in addition to the business support Deidre listed, business support in terms of the mechanics liens and any UCC filings, that is the Secretary's job to oversee those and to ensure that they are properly managed. Secretary is supposed to be participating in multiple committees and have an opinion, or at the very least provide an opinion on multiple committees. The other job of the Secretary of State as a commissioner of the elections is, if a candidate is challenged, there are 3 people who decide whether the challenge should stand or whether the candidate's name should be on a ballot. It is the Attorney General, it is the state auditor, and it is the Secretary of State.
Thank you. Start with you, Jules. You both mentioned the Secretary of State's influence on small business. What changes would you like to see in the Secretary of State's influence on small business?
I would like to see more support for the business owners. For instance, you can right now register a business online. However, it's very cumbersome. You cannot, however, file a fictitious name adaptation that's doing business as most people know. There are multiple other filings that you cannot do online. From the technological point of view, with my computer background, I can tell you that I see no reason why this is not happening. It's one database, and it should be automatic, and it should be very easily accessible. The mechanics liens that I mentioned before, my construction clients struggle with them on a daily basis. They should not be paying me as their attorney to help them with a mechanics lien. That information should be easily available from the Secretary of State's office and should be provided to them on a regular basis.
Deidre, you mentioned the Secretary of State's influence on small business. What changes would you like to see?
So the first thing is that that office should not take for granted that because someone is starting a business that they know exactly how to do business in our state. And working with my small businesses, many times they walk away from that office very confused on what their next steps are. They filed their name, they've gotten their paperwork back, they've given their money, now what? I want to ensure that we're providing our business owners with toolkits, whether they're going into the hospitality industry, opening a restaurant, or opening a salon, or opening a food truck, that they know everything that it's going to take for them to do business. They know that they have to go to the Department of Health. They know that they have to go to the Internal Revenue Board, all of the steps that are necessary. We also need to do a better job of connecting them to those resources like USDA loan opportunities for our farmers and our rural business owners. In addition to that, Small Business Administration loan opportunities and targeted small business loan opportunities for our women-owned businesses, our veteran-owned businesses, and minority-owned businesses.
Thank you. So we'll start with Deirdre, and I'm going to put two of them sort of together. The overriding question is, if you could make any change you wanted to Iowa's current election process, what would it be? But with that, are there any other states where processes of registration and voting seem models for you? So if you could make any change to Iowa's election process, what would it be? And have other states influenced you?
So the biggest change would be automatic voter registration. There are some states that do only vote by mail. There are some states that only do vote in person. I think that I really like the way that we have diversity in how we can exercise our right to vote, whether it's vote early in person, vote by mail, or vote on the last day to vote, which as we know it as Election Day. Those are key elements for us to organize and get people engaged in. It meets a variety of different types of audiences, regardless of what their work schedule may be. The other component that I think is key is ensuring that people know about that. Communication is what has tremendously been lacking out of this office, both on the business side and on the voting side. And so the other change is to ensure that we're increasing communication to our voter base so that they understand exactly what's going on. I mean, sometimes we may have 3 and 4 elections in some communities because of bond issues, municipal elections, and other things. And communication from the Secretary of State's office is going to be more and more prevalent as life goes on and becomes more and more digital.
So again, the overriding question, Jules, is if you could make any change you wanted to Iowa's current election process, what would it be? And have you taken any, or any other states where processes of registration and voting seem models for you?
Do I have a magic wand? Because I think everybody at this point knows how I feel about the voter ID law, and if I had a magic wand, I would most certainly erase that off the books, or at the very least repel that. But I agree with Deirdre. I really enjoy the fact that we have a variety of ways we can vote. We can vote by mail, we can vote in person, we can vote on the last day. To me, again, voting is very important, and I usually take pictures and I vote on the election day. I would hate to take either one of those options away. I think we have a good system in place. I think it just needs to have a lot more education and a lot more, and remove the barriers and provide more training for our poll workers. But I think our system in the state of Iowa is pretty good.
So, Jules, what is your opinion about maintaining an appropriate length of time for voters to make their vote? You sort of spoke to it just now. What is the appropriate length of time?
I'm assuming that's the question about the 29 days versus 40 days. I have a very strong rule: if it's not broken, don't fix it. We've had it for many years of 40 days. Why are we fixing it to 29 days? I am very happy that Judge Romano issued an injunction, a temporary injunction on that particular aspect of the law. And I am not supporting the change up to 29 days. I just don't see the point.
So when we saw, you don't have to repeat it, it's okay. When we see 13% of registered voters participating in a primary election. That means we've got a lot of work to do. And typically, in that 40 days in engaging voters, there was a lot of strategy that went around engaging different types of folks and different blocks of people and different populations throughout our state, and it was critical. And those 11 days was a big deal, not only for us in this room, but also for the folks across the street, our college students. By the time that early voting started for the primary, our college students were in transition. Some of them were in finals week, some of them were trying to move from their spring residence to their summer residence, and some of them were just trying to figure out their life. That 11 days was really, really critical, and when Secretary Pate went around to the colleges, that was the thing that they told them, in addition to the ID that they did not want, and he did not listen to them. And I traveled throughout the state and talked to our college students, trying to figure out what they liked about our voting process, what they didn't like. The number one thing that they did not like, it wasn't the ID, it was the cuts on early voting.
Thank you. Starting with you, Deidre, what measures do you support to ensure that all counties in the state have secure elections?
Yes. So we recently got approved for HAVA money, a little over $6 million. It's called Help America Vote Act. We received those dollars previously. However, at that time, Mr. Schultz, the Secretary of State, misused those dollars, and those are the dollars that he used to find voter fraud and research voter fraud in our state. Needless to say, we're given a second chance. The state had to pay back over $250,000 of that misused money. But now that we have a second chance, we need to use those dollars to improve voting machines. Paper ballots is key as it relates to elections. I know sometimes we may want to vote electronically out of convenience, but we know that there are folks trying to embark on our election system, and it's pretty difficult to hack paper. And so I would like to ensure that each and every one of our counties has up-to-date machines. Not all of them can afford it, like Johnson County or Polk County. If they heard me saying that, they'd be like, we can't afford it either. But at any rate, I think it's important to ensure that we have the best possible machines in order to administer our elections and ensure that every county is treated fairly as well.
So, Jules, what measure would you support to ensure that all counties in the state have secure elections?
Well, for starters, join the the County Audit Association and participate in their meetings and their training and provide training to them. I think that would be a good start. That currently the county auditors are complaining about that they are not getting that support from Mr. Pate. It is my understanding that Mr. Pate provided 2 trainings in a year, neither of which the county auditors could attend, and he does not attend any of their meetings of the association. So working with county auditors, essentially they're the ones who are there overseeing the elections in their county. Working with them is the most important thing to in ensuring that elections are administered properly, and working with county auditors all over the state is the key. I think I said that twice.
Thank you. Jules, we'll start with you, and we're moving away a little bit. In order to measure the results of the new voting laws passed in Iowa, what statistics would you recommend gathering?
As I have mentioned before, out of 1.6 million voters in Iowa in 2016 election, only 10 were counted as people who improperly casted the vote, whether they were immigrants who didn't know they couldn't vote, or whether they were, I believe there were 2 people who were felons who thought their rights were restored. So only 10 people. That is an important statistic, that out of 1.6 million, we had 10. The other important statistic is the cost. That is something that, as I mentioned before, ACLU pulled up the numbers from Indiana, from the state of Indiana. Mr. Pate himself suggests that it will cost about $1 million. That's the important statistic. The other statistic that needs to be looked at is the, again, Dallas County votes that were lost and then found. They had about 6,000 votes, had no impact on the outcome of our election, according to Mr. Pate and Dallas County Auditor.
Deidre, in order to measure the results of the new voting laws passed in Iowa, what statistics would you recommend gathering?
I would gather the number of people who are turned away. That, I think, is the biggest issue about this new law, is that we have seen minimal education from the Secretary of State's office. And luckily, this year, we have a record number of candidates running throughout the entire state, which means that those candidates are organizing in their respective neighborhoods and their communities. And so hopefully that's going to help us with this midterm election. But I believe measuring the people who are turned away are going to show us how this process has infringed on the voter, because anytime one voter is turned away, it's an injustice to our entire system.
Thank you. Well, what is the best way to expand voting rights in the state? Can you support your answer? Deidre.
So the best way, I believe, to expand voter registration in our state and voter participation in lieu of automatic voter registration is to work with our nonprofit and nonpartisan organizations who have a vested interest in seeing people vote. I talked about earlier those county auditors operating in 6 different regions. If we could get those organizations to the table with our county auditors, we could really figure out some amazing ways to bring our resources together, pull them together to best get out the vote in these regions. I can't tell you how often I talk to auditors and they're resource poor. And when we're looking at our county organizations, they don't have the resources to get out the vote as well. When we work with these organizations who are connected with voting blocks, it's going to expand. Not only that, it's going to depoliticize the vote. And that's key in the climate that we're in right now. We have schools who don't want to open up to be polling locations. We have schools that don't want to do the voter registration drives that they're required to do by state code each year because the vote has been so politicized. So that would be the second thing.
Jules, what is the best way to expand voting rights in the state?
Education and voter outreach. I'm going to have to echo what Deidre said. And add education, education, and education. As Deidre mentioned many times, there was about $50,000 that was allocated to the Secretary of State to implement the voter ID or to educate the population on voter ID. That's not enough. And that's not enough just for that vote. But it most certainly is not enough for educating our voters and doing as much voter outreach as possible.
Thank you. Starting with you, Jules, please explain why you do or do not think it is important to reduce the role of money in American elections.
Man.
Oh, thank you.
I am going to bring up the debates of gubernatorial candidates. That our candidate, Jake Porter, was recently excluded from the debates. He was invited and the invitation was rescinded. And one of the reasons one of the TV stations said, provided to him, was that he didn't raise enough money. Libertarian Party is a major party in the state of Iowa. Libertarian candidates should be on that debate stage, and the money should not, how much money he raised or did not raise, should not dictate how much, whether his voice is heard in the state of Iowa. So I don't know if I answered that question. I do believe that the amount of money that is spent should be minimized. But I don't have a good answer as far as by how much and what measures need to be taken to do that.
So do you explain why you do or do not think it is important to reduce the role of money in American elections?
I think it is important to reduce the role of money. As a first-time candidate, when I spoke with a consultant about running, the first question that they asked me was, how much money can you raise? Not how many votes can you get? It's important that we really adhere to this concept that our democracy is for the people and by the people. And too often we get caught up in polls and we get caught up in how much money a candidate is raising, and that really drives the conversation. I want to take the money put the money as less of a priority and make the priority about the people, the voters, because before we're Democrats, before we're Republicans, Libertarians, before we're rich or poor, we're people first, and we've got to keep that as a basic fundamental aspect of why we vote and why we participate in our democracy.
Moving back to one we've sort of touched on before, what changes would you make to the current operations in the Secretary of State's office? And would you directly talk, or specifically, how would you educate small business owners? How would you encourage citizens to vote? And we'll start
Jules.
with Jules. Thank you.
Right, I answered that last, right?
You answered last, so usually it goes.
So it is me. My
Yeah.
bad. Okay. Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
She wasn't listening because she expected me to answer.
I was trying to, I was trying to get the. So it has to do with what changes would you make to the current operations in the Secretary of State's office? Specifically, how would you educate small business owners? You both mentioned that. How would you encourage citizens to vote? But once you find them, how are we going to?
So the first change that I would make in that office outside of the business registration and voter encouragement is to hire a director of election security, because I think it's ever more important that we take election security a little bit more seriously outside of the Secretary of State having security clearance. Reason being, it's because we know people are in rooms and they're paid to hack systems. We've seen it with Google, we've seen it with Sony, we've seen it with 21 of our states throughout the country. And having someone that's in place, their job every day is to ensure that our election system is secure and that we're not being reactive, but rather we're being preventative and staying ahead of the game. In addition to that, with our small business owners, we have to implement strategies and processes so that when an individual walks in that office, the front office staff is ready to be able to provide that person with the information that's necessary for them to do business in our state. Doesn't mean we're in the business of service delivery, because we have other departments throughout state government that can do that, but we could at least connect our business owners to those other departments.
Okay. So, Jules, specifically, how would you educate small business owners and encourage citizens to vote by making changes to the current operations in the Secretary of State's office?
I would start with the audit of the Secretary of State's office and identify the waste that there is right now. I believe that and I'm going to get a lot of slack for that, I believe that every governmental agency has a lot of waste and it needs to be audited and eliminated. I believe that the information that Deidre says, if there are no funds to provide for the educational material to our business owners, at the very least we can throw it on a website and have people go to that website and provide the links to the website and the Secretary of State. The most important thing to me as somebody who deals with that office on behalf of the business owners is to have the registration of the business as smoothly as possible and to change that system as quickly as possible so that our business owners feel that they are supported. I'm out of time.
Okay. Secretary Pate has a lot of experience in this position. What qualities do you have that you believe makes you the better candidate, Jules?
I've been a business owner or worked for a startup or managed people since I was 17. I am in my 40s now, so I have about 25 years of experience. I have computer science education, and I spent 10 years in computer field before I went to law school and got my MBA at the same time. Computer science education is very beneficial to somebody who wants to implement online registration or automatic registration or online business registration. I can manage people. I have done this for years. I run my own business now. At the age of 20, 21, I was hiring people, managing them, training them. I most certainly know what it takes to identify the talent and to grow that talent in the position that it is.
Deidre, Secretary of Pate has a lot of experience in this position. What qualities do you have that you believe make you a better candidate?
I would disagree in saying that he doesn't have a lot of experience in this role. I've been the end user of this office my entire career. I've worked hand in hand with our voters. I worked hand in hand with our businesses, connecting them to the Secretary of State's office, helping them with their filings. And when we see minimal turnout in our elections, when we see business owners having to wait 30 to 45 days in order to receive their filing, when we see our attorneys being capped at how many filings they can file in a day and file in a week, to me that says that the lack of experience in that office is a burden on the voter and a burden on the business owner.
Thank you. Deidre, how closely would you need to work, consult, or confide with governor, lieutenant governor, treasurer, and the county auditors? And maybe one more than other?
Sure. So each week there's an executive committee that the Secretary of State sits on with the governor, lieutenant governor, and the other state positions. Mr. Pate attends those meetings 50% of the time in person. I think, one, it's important to be present. I think it's also important that we have a lifeline to our county auditors. Those auditors don't answer to the Secretary of State's office necessarily, but they do administer the elections, and they're in charge of ensuring that those elections are administered to code. And so I think more and more it's important for us to develop relationships with all of our auditors, going to their state conventions that they have twice a month, and also, or twice a year, and also going to their biannual meetings that they have in their 6 different regions to ensure that we're all on the same page about this elections process. Our auditors do more than just administer elections. They have really big jobs, and we have to ensure that the Secretary of State's office is providing adequate training tools so that those auditors can administer elections appropriately.
Jules, how closely would you need to work, consult, confide with governor, lieutenant governor, treasurer, county auditors?
As closely as necessary. As Deidre mentioned, the presence at the meetings is very important. As Deidre and I demonstrated to you today, we believe that presence at the meetings is important. I do not know what Mr. Pate has going on today, but it would be interesting to debate him for once. Working with county auditors, as I have said before, it is the key to our election, because county auditors are the ones who are overseeing our elections, and it is extremely important, and I would work with them on a regular basis. The executive committee meeting, it has to be attended. You cannot participate in our legislative process without being present.
Thank you. Yes or no question. Jules, would you support lowering the voting age in Iowa to 16?
No.
Deidre, would you support lowering the voting age in Iowa to 16?
Haven't thought about that.
Okay. Another yes or no?
Yeah.
Deidre, do you support instant runoff, ranked choice voting?
I do not support that.
Jules, do you support instant runoff, ranked choice voting?
No, I do not.
Okay, and now I have one more question that's, well, it has the word voting rights in it, so I'll ask it, okay? Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross has approved adding a citizenship question to the 2020 census to better enforce the Voting Rights Act provisions against racial discrimination. This may be brought up this week in the Supreme Court. What is your interpretation? And we'll start with Deidre.
So I've worked on census, trying to get people to actually complete it, and there's a lot of misconceptions around them participating in the
census. You mean complete the census?
To actually participate in the census, and I think adding that question will make it even more difficult for people to feel comfortable completing that document. And I think it's important for us to know who lives in our communities, and that census helps us do that. And so I would not be in favor of adding that question. I think that we don't give our auditors enough credit. They are very, very capable of finding the mistakes that happen when people are voting twice, whether it be by accident or on purpose. They're very capable of meshing up addresses from different counties to ensure that voters are voting in the right county. And I think by taking those measures, we're basically not valuing the work that our auditors are doing and what they're capable of.
Thank you. You want me to read it again, Jules?
No, I can answer that. As an immigrant, I can tell you that when I first came to this country in '92 and we were getting the census paperwork to fill out, we were afraid. This isn't something we were going to do without that question. I can only imagine how much more of diversion this question would be to an immigrant. So no, I would not support that particular position.
Thank you. Well, we've come to the end of our questions. Any more for us? No? So we will start our 2 minutes for closing remarks. And probably, Jules, you spoke last, so would you go first, please? 2 minutes. You know, we could probably even give you 3 minutes. Okay, you ready, timer? 3 minutes for closing remarks.
Well, I'm not ready for 3 minutes.
Okay.
And you know, it's getting late and I don't want to keep people here as longer than necessary. I'm just going to say again, I am a woman, I am a business owner, I'm a lawyer, I am a former computer tech, I'm a libertarian, I am Russian who you should want to have in charge of your elections. But if that's not enough, I'm also a mother of 2 teenage boys. I'm a single mother of 2 teenage boys, and anybody who ever raised teenagers or went through that stage knows that I can withstand any storm. And that, my teenagers, was the reason I said, no, I would not lower the age to 16 to vote. I love my children. They're great kids. They support me in everything I do. But I do not believe that they're ready to make those decisions. Thank you.
Peter.
I'm an African-American woman, and when I think about the right to vote, women have only been voting 98 years. African Americans have only been voting without conditions for a little bit over 50 years. You know, I talked about all those races that I worked on. The first race that I worked on was this woman running for elections commissioner in Yazoo County, Mississippi. And she stands at about 6'5". She was a teacher at that time, and she had been teaching about 25 years, and she's my grandma. And my grandma forced me to work on that race. Didn't get compensated, didn't even volunteer, but as I always say, no one says no to Maddie Kay. And I'm glad that she forced me to work on that race, because at a young age, she was planting the seeds in me to the point that I understood the value of the vote. I understood truly what that sacrifice meant. She didn't have to go and run for this county office that I don't even know if she got paid to do it. But she did it because she wanted her students to get involved, and she wanted their parents to get involved. When we see minimal turnout in our elections, in our municipal elections, and our midterm elections, we know we can do better than that. We're home of the Iowa caucuses, first in the nation. And when we say that, in that same breath, I want to say that we're just involved in our school board and city council elections. You know, I don't think it's enough to have 1.9 million registered and active voters when we have 2.4 million eligible voters in our state. I don't think it's enough for 13% of folks to show up for a primary race. I know that we can do better than that. I don't believe it's the party's job to get people out to vote. I don't believe it's the candidate's job to get people out to vote. It's the Secretary of State's job to build our voter base and instill in our students at an early age the importance of their most fundamental right that they have to access the ballot box. I don't want us to lose sight of our future voters. I don't want us to lose sight of those voters that believe that their vote doesn't matter and their vote doesn't count. We need a Secretary of State that's making a conscientious effort to engage our communities. We also need a Secretary of State that is about business and about our small businesses. Rural Iowa depends on the backbone of our small businesses, whether they're on Main Street or they have acreages. And if we have a Secretary of State that's focused on our businesses, they're focused on providing those resources to our businesses are going to be well off, because we have over 260,000 of them in our state, providing jobs for about 50% of the workforce. We don't know what economic trials and tribulations are ahead of us as a state, but what we do know is that we can prepare our small businesses for it. I won't forget 2008, driving around to dilapidated strip malls and car lots that once had hundreds of cars now have 5. I don't want us to have to deal with that anymore, because our business owners are not only providing for their families, but they're creating jobs and they're adding value to our communities.
Thank you. Thank you to the candidates, to those of you in the audience, those watching at home, Iowa City for the use of this facility. Thank you to the staff of our local television station for making this video cast and live streaming possible. We would like to remind you that the views expressed in this forum are those of the candidates, and the sponsorship of the forum is not an endorsement of any candidate. Remember to vote on or before November 6th. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you both for
So much. Very nice to meet you.
in your initial introduction. You said I'm a woman, and that's it. You didn't say